About 6 years ago on Halloween, a few friends and I went trick-or-treating. We were all about 12 or 13 years old, and we ended up taking my 5-year-old brother with us. Where we lived, there was a neighborhood of extremely nice houses. You could tell wealthy people lived there. Naturally, this was our first stop. After hitting a few houses, we came up to our last one. We walked up to the driveway and knocked on the door. When the door opened, and all we saw was a huge flash. All of us were extremely confused and slightly blinded from the flash. When we could finally see again, we saw 2 men and a woman just standing there and staring at us. They didn't say anything, just stood there with those creepy smiles. We left immediately. No idea what happened. Not sure I really want to know what they did. That was my last year trick-or-treating ever. Creeps me out just to think about it. So creepy camera people, let's not meet. I was 12 years old at the time of this story, and out trick-or-treating with my best friend, who was also 12. Back in those days, it wasn't unusual for older children, including females, to be unescorted by adults. We lived in an older area, now a suburb of a major city, suitably dressed in costumes, and as usual, running along excitedly. We were several blocks away from either of our homes, and we didn't know anyone on this particular block. But the houses were mostly well lit, with the front porch lights and many carved pumpkins on the steps or near the doors. One of the main signs that the household was giving out candy. I remember there was this particular house on 4th Street, about midway on the south side of the block. In this area were some houses of the kind built by earlier settlers before city codes, often somewhat odd, with different parts added later on. Anyways, we get to this house and it has a walkway to the right of the house. This leads to a few steps up to a door, but the door is wide open. My friend and I paused on the steps, a bit uncertain. Of course, we had been warned not to go into any of the houses, but this is what? An extra long porch. We see a long, empty hallway that appears to be built alongside of the house. It's odd, but the hallway or porch, if it was very well lit. And at the other end of it was another door, beside which was 2 carved pumpkins. This is obviously a trick-or-treat door, so after brief hesitation, we forged ahead. We knocked on this second door, and a woman maybe in her 30s, ordinary looking and not too friendly, opened it and gave us some candy, and then shut the door. We turned around and were heading back down the long hallway, when suddenly out stepped a man who had been hiding behind the open first door. He shut the door, then stood in front of the closed door, blocking our exit. My friend and I froze in our tracks. The man, probably in his 30s, mid-sized and average looking, stood for a few seconds not saying anything, but seeming to enjoy the effect that he was having, namely scaring us speechless. Well, it was Halloween. A scare and a laugh maybe might be okay, even expected, perhaps from someone's goofy dad or uncle pranking it up. There were a lot of haunted house setups after all, but this guy just stood there, blocking the door and not saying anything, and staring at us with a smug, creepy smile. Finally he said, "Don't you know you're not supposed to walk into strangers' houses?" But he still didn't move away from the door. We continued to stand there, frozen, not saying anything. After some more freaky silence, he said, "So what are you gonna do now?" I knew the way he was looking at us was more than a scary prank. It was creepy and weird. I didn't know what my friend was thinking, but I was thinking if he doesn't open that door very soon, I'm gonna run back and pound really hard on the second door until that woman answers. This continued for maybe a couple minutes, the creeper gloating and leering at us while blocking the door, but it seemed much longer. Finally, he stepped over, grabbed the handle, and disappeared behind the back of the now open door. We bolted out of there like a pair of jackrabbits. My friend and I looked at each other as we ran away, but we continued on our trick-or-treat mission down the street. We never discussed how weird it was later, and we never told our parents. So creepy, leering guy who blocked the door? Let's never meet again. It started on a haunted cave on Halloween. Just me and my friend Anna. Me and Anna are total opposites. She is a blonde, outgoing, and completely fearless. I'm dark hair, introverted, and a people pleaser. That's actually how I ended up at this cave. People pleasing. Anyways, we went through the attraction and it was pretty awesome. The usual people with chainsaws, screamers, clowns. One clown though kept following us. He wasn't like the other clowns who wore face paint with fake blood spattered on them. He didn't have a big red nose and clown clothes. He had on regular, if not tattered jeans, a stained sweaty white tee, and a clown mask. This mask was pretty detailed. It had the eyes cut out and a wicked, jagged toothed mouth with blood smeared around it. It was seriously creepy. He followed us all the way through the house as we giggled and ran until the fog room at the end. Once we make it outside, we get to Coco and watch the local bands play. While in line, the clown walked straight up to me and stood inches away, breathing in and out so hard that his mask stuck to his face and released with each breath. Okay, creepy, but normal for this place. He walked away and we giggled, but he remained close. We walked over to the band and he stood right behind me. He started tugging on my hair. I ignored it, but he began tugging even harder. Suddenly he pulls so hard that my head whips back. Anna starts yelling at him and he lets go and walks away, but like before, not too far. She wanted me to tell someone, but I didn't. We were at the haunted cave after all, and he probably just didn't mean to, but she said no, they couldn't touch you, and we walked over to the ticket booth to complain. It went like this. Anna said, "Ma'am, your clown over there pulled my friend's hair so hard, it almost ripped out." The ticket lady said, "I don't see any of our clowns. They're all in the cave. None of our people walk around out here. They're all behind that rope," which was right behind us, because some families with small kids come out for the hay rides and bands. Anna said, "That clown right there did it. How do you not see him?" The ticket lady said, "Calm down, miss. That's not one of our clowns. Are you sure he isn't a friend of yours?" I said, "Thank you. We're so sorry." Fearless, Anna decided to confront the clown. She marched right up with me beside her and demanded he took off his mask. He didn't speak and continued to look right at me. He reached his hand out towards me and I refused to touch him. He pushed Anna from in front of him and stepped towards me. He was just inches from my face when he screamed the most terrifyingly psychotic scream I had ever heard. Everyone turned to look. The band stopped playing and Anna grabbed me by my arm and pulled. His stare had me frozen. Then Anna grabbed my face, slapped me, and we ran. I looked behind me and he was just standing, staring. Everyone went back to what they were doing, like it was nothing. We got to the car and peeled out. Anna kept saying that we need the police. We need to call the police. I told her that it wasn't a big deal and that it was just a weirdo at the haunted cave. But in reality, I was just too scared to act. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. He had a knife. That's why she slapped me and pulled me away. Not from the fear of being screamed at. She saw the knife in his hands. We contacted the police soon after, but they didn't take us seriously. I'm now afraid to go to any haunted attractions. Not because they're scary, but you never really know if someone works there, or if they're there because they fit in so well. My dad was the coolest guy on the block, probably because he was one of the 3 black dads who lived in our town. The population is around 98% Caucasian, and that's not an exaggeration. He was a state police officer, intimidating, wore Oakleys before the hipsters, and was generally a rough-sounding person. But the one thing he feared the most was Halloween. He would tell my sister and I crazy stories at night about his life when he was in high school in slum in New Jersey. And that every Halloween crazy things would happen. He may have been pulling our legs a bit, but we didn't care. When Halloween would roll around, he would take us out while our mom stayed home to trick-or-treat. One night in 5th grade, Lexi and I were dressed as a witch and 50s poodle skirt girl. Dad held her hands walking to the last street when I realized I'd lost our mom's scarf that she let me borrow. She loved that thing, so we walked all the way back towards the dark corner of our street. It's by the woods in a small stream, but when it's dark you can't see anything. Dad said he'd seen something and walked towards it. When he got there, he started to slow down and he was just staring at something in the dark that he couldn't see. Lexi called out to him if he had found Mom's scarf, and he told her to be quiet and started crouching down. For several moments we stood there, waiting. I could make out the scarf above his head, tied to a branch. He grabbed the scarf, still staring into the dark, and started backing away. Then Dad screamed and sort of shuffled backwards. It was a low, throaty scream, like he was furious. He was swearing too, but I don't remember what he said. Whatever Dad had been staring at then bolted out of the trees and ran down the street, opposite of where we lived. It was a little child, probably a boy, in a black costume with skeleton bones on the front and a skull mask. When Lexi and I tried to go over and see what happened, Dad yelled for us to stay back. He got onto his cell phone and called Mom to come pick us up. His next phone call was to the police. We left before we could see anything, but the next day Mom told us about the dead, skinned animals that had been found. By the time us kids could go look, they taped off the place and taken out the bloody animals. But there were still stains on the pavement, and the smell was pretty bad. The kids talked about it a little in school though, and I was curious if they ever caught the boy. Nothing came out of the local newspapers, though it was quickly forgotten. Eventually Dad could have told me more, but that was the last Halloween we'd ever spent together. But I do remember him and Mom arguing for the next couple of days about never letting us go trick-or-treating ever again. This happened the night before Halloween, back in the year 2010. At the time I was a freshman in college, living on campus. That year the 31st fell on a Monday, so student festivities went on the Sunday before. During the afternoon at around 7, I was outside playing soccer on a field near my place and I noticed an SUV driving by several times. I only noticed this vehicle because we kicked the ball over the fence several times and that car was present at least twice when we were climbing over the fence to get it. I didn't think much of it at the time and proceeded to go to a party later that night. My girlfriend and a few friends and I left at around 9:30 p.m. and we noticed a helicopter in the sky with a bright floodlight attached to it. Seemingly scanning the area, we proceeded to the party and didn't fret over it. The party was on the other side of the campus, and so we missed all the sirens and flashing lights racing up and down the street. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Let me go back. We got back from the party at around 11 p.m. and I immediately noticed that not only was the first helicopter still in the air, but that there was a steady stream of police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks driving up and down the street nearby. However, none of them had their lights nor sirens on, so I wasn't alarmed. The next day the internet informed me that an SUV was found ablaze in the parking lot with a woman's body inside. This happened about half a mile to 3/4 of a mile from where I lived. I guess during the party the area was crawling with police and other authorities, trying to look for clues. My roommate later told me that there was non-stop sirens for a good 20 minutes after I left for the party, and the next few weeks more info surfaced, saying that a man had killed his wife and tried to burn the body. He broke her neck as well and bludgeoned her body. If the news articles below are to be trusted, the killer was lighting his wife's body on fire during the same time I was getting dressed up in the Woody costume I was in for the costume party. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I made the connection with the SUV that I saw while playing soccer earlier in the day. I find it very chilling that while I was playing soccer, someone was driving within 20 yards of me with the corpse in the car, especially since it was on the campus of a seemingly secure university in a very safe city. Halloween has unfortunately never been a big deal out here in Scotland, and that's always bummed me out because I love Halloween. But after this year, I think I'll be happy never celebrating it again. My street and the next street over have a lot of young kids who go trick-or-treating, so while I was out shopping all day with my mom, I decided to pick up some sweets in case anyone came to our door. I had plans to go out to the cinema to see Ouija with my boyfriend, so when I got home I was getting myself ready to go out and my mom was just putting all the other shopping away. So when the first load of kids came to the door, I was the one who had to answer it. There were children from our street, the next one over, and some I couldn't recognize as well as an adult at the end of the path. And they dressed all in black and had some sort of mask covering their face, but it wasn't anything I recognized from a movie or anything. Anyway, they all told me their jokes and I gave them treats and they made their way back down the path and onto the next house. I was about to close the door when I noticed that the guy with the kids was still standing at the end of my path. He hadn't noticed and he wasn't watching the children either. He was looking right at me and my skin began to crawl. I backed slowly into the house and watched him as he raised his hand and waved very slowly at me. and I was about to call out to him when my mom came to the door to make sure I was alright, and he immediately took off in the opposite way from the children. He hadn't been with them at all, and he left as soon as he realized that I wasn't home alone. I was completely freaked out and told my boyfriend all about it when he came over to the house to pick me up, but we both completely forgot all about it when we were watching the movie. When I finally got home, it was getting really late and trick-or-treating was well and truly over around here. When I got inside, my mom was getting ready to take the dogs out for a walk so they could do the last-minute business, and they would meet up with my dad on his way home from work. So I was gonna be home alone, and after my horrible encounter this day, I've never really been comfortable being home alone by myself ever again, and it's only ever been worse on Halloween. Anyways, I was home alone and I grabbed some snacks and went up to the bedroom and onto my computer so that I could just do some writing and scroll through Tumblr and listen to some music. After my first creepy encounter with the guys, my dad bought a motion sensor light and attached it to the wall of our house right outside of my window. Normally it would go off whenever a cat walked along our fence, but it usually goes out about a couple minutes after. I usually know when the light comes on because it lights up my whole room given where it's placed, and where I was sitting on my computer the light came on. I ignored it at first because I knew it would go off soon, but 5 minutes passed and it still hadn't gone off. So I opened my blinds to look out the window and see what was going on. My stomach almost fell out of my ass when I looked out and saw the creep from hours before just sitting on the fence, waving at my window to keep the lights on. His waving slowed down suddenly when he spotted me, and it was all seriously creepy again. I didn't know what to do. I just got flashbacks from before. Luckily, I heard the front door open and my parents coming into the house with the dogs, so I rushed downstairs and started screaming at them about the guy on the fence. My dad didn't question me. He just took the dogs and rushed through the house, through the back door and opened and ran outside, and I heard him shouting, "Get the fuck out of here, you creep! I'm gonna call the police!" Dad scared him off, but I convinced him not to call the police because I didn't want to relive the whole thing again. I just wanted to go to sleep and forget about the whole entire night. So to the creepy guy in the mask waving at me from the end of my path and sitting on my fence, let's not meet, ever. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. This bummed my brother and I out because we had planned to go trick-or-treating with a few friends. Our parents just told us that we were too old to be trick-or-treating and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house and hang out there. But of course, my friends declined the invitation to come over because they still wanted to go trick-or-treating. So that left me home alone with my brother handing out candy. A lot of people stopped coming over to our house at around 10 p.m. Almost all the candy was gone. My brother and I decided that we eat the rest. We were sitting on the couch watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with candy, when there was a knock at the door. I stormed off the couch wondering who the hell could be knocking on our door this late. I assumed it was just some late trick-or-treaters. Even if that was the case, I had turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should be a dead giveaway that we were out of candy or that we weren't home, so I assumed it was just my parents. Being cautious, I looked through the people and saw a suspicious man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with a hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face. The only detail of his face that I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way that this guy was a trick-or-treater, because he wasn't even wearing a costume and was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he also looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell I was opening the door. Still looking through the people, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open the door and was shaking a bit. It wasn't cold outside. Definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling. He was giving me an extremely bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy," I shouted to him. I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" the man asked with a almost mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. "Should I call the police?" my little brother asked me quietly, gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch him through the people. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pockets and he was still shaking a bit. I began to wonder if he was armed and decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could muster. "Get the fuck away from my house or I'll call the police," I shouted. His smile faded and he bared teeth. His teeth were piss yellow, and I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. He had a look of fury plastered on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew I wasn't fucking around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw him completely off of our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. My brother and I were still a bit paranoid after this and watched TV until our parents had come home. We didn't tell them about the man since he hadn't really tried to harm us. Now that I think about this, I wish we had called the police. Maybe we would have been able to prevent a murder. You see, the next day, we found out that an elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying on the front porch covered in blood. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and the neck. My brother and I immediately knew who had done it, and we told the police what we knew. They couldn't do much with the information that we had given them. Since we hadn't seen many details on his face, they went on the hunt for the man, but never caught him. I blame myself for that poor old lady's murder, because I could have prevented it if I had just called the police. I think the most disturbing thing of all is that he didn't try to take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left untouched. But he could have gone in and taken whatever he wanted since the door was wide open. That means that he just wanted to kill. That was his only intention. He didn't want any money or jewelry. He had only the urge to murder. So creepy crackhead Halloween slasher, let's never meet again.